Tene tatanda Saraha zepe Gyalbo Doha Della Gerdo Rinpoche Yeshe Chimboton, Long Shaja Chimboton, Review Shaja Chimbote, that number Ye, number some Yep Nane, that Tangbo Yeshe Chimbote, that Shutuparella. 다 대섬진나네 다 값스 바발라 람 차제 침보 예베 값레 람 차제 침보 텔라양 다치당가 로프 람라 람 로파라 켐바땅 와제도 차제 침보 람 우템바제 니진나네 다 지당가 넘버 니 와래라 드니 대야 당아란소 단다 차제 침보 람란도나야 안다 대견돈 도다 송화절람 칸델라 로나야 람마 노르와티 베 갈쳔보지라 티처나 람 노르와 텔라 켐바땅와데 갑드나라 베 갈쳔보나네 다람 노르웨기 젠살술 다 텔라 사치 넘버 지고네 성요라라 대나네 다 당보다 이바니데 가신 휴바레 다대야 당보대 단다 식수제바니 자지바다 데니바데 식수제바니 자니바티 고네 휴바레라 다 드링게 가서라 숨바데 식수제바 니휴 자선바레라 다데 식수제바 온드세나 식수제바니 자선바 tene sachi ga on de sena tene sachi sumba ta ti ga lam lopa la khemba tang ga sachi sumba nda bo ji la tene te ta nyam ji cheng ni ta che ngarang su ting yen zen gam ba ka so la nyam ji cheng ni tene ta te si nyam ni che pa te dhamsi jinsi che pa tan da wa ga pe go ne tem pa.
Within Saraha's Doha for the king, there is the presentation of ground Mahamudra, of path Mahamudra, and of fruition Mahamudra. Of these three, we have completed the first, the presentation of ground Mahamudra, and are now in the midst of the second, the presentation of path Mahamudra. This has two parts, teaching one to discard attachment to mistaken paths and presenting the actual path of Mahamudra. Within the first of these, teaching one to discard mistaken paths, there are 8 sections. The reason why this subject of mistaken paths is presented in so much detail is that whatever path one pursues, whether it is that of Mahamudra, of Sutra, of Tantra, one must ensure that one is on the correct path. So, of these 8 sections in this topic, yesterday we completed the first 2, which were verses 21 and 22. Today we're going to start with the third section, which is verse 23. And this is an instruction to avoid becoming bound by minor experiences. And the analogy used to convey this instruction is the fire offering of a Brahmin.
Tene ta tela ya chitang nasi chitang number 2 rabu ji song yo re la number 2 de ta tramsi ge jinsi se pe tang tene ta te pe tang dan la ta je tanda tanda 제 탑람지 맹화 된저 냠링양 답시 마트바 됐던바래라 드니 태양 다 점시게 점시 넘지 다 지당 그 믹반다보다 드니 대견들 띵엔진지 냠링라서 봐 히보 매봐 다 점시게 레이징 아잘다 덴베고니 테네 마르타 테네 레라소파 테 테네 메이난달라 세네 진시세게 요라라 테네 다테야 지당게 진시세베가 없을라 제 띵엔진지 감이야바다 테네 냠리 야포이야바 안다보지 옛나 테라 단 제븐다보 용 시그레티 이나야 다 단다 깝드나라 톰제 다 리징아 잘다 덴바 마토 테라 믹살게 나티니 띵엔진지 냠니라 소바 히도 메바 다 데이터버지 그 진시 세나 테니 단제다 마르텐조 메이치게레시나 치게레 마토 다 테라 제번다보 자침보제 용기요 마레라 베테 옌도 테니 남케 찍데 테니 다단다 주홈 주라 호미 감발라소 부고니 테니 조니 드츠바테 테니 랑글 르라 대화제 반다보제 그 초로와제 요라라 대다부 초로와제 버세바 대라야 다 카신 휴바 현도 처자 침부 냠린다 덴부고니 대다부게 mik바세나 당보 다 탑라테네 대화질라지 대화라지 때네 테니 대화 동발라토네 대통 있으면 비히 질라지와라 고바요 아레세나 고바요 아레 마토 테니 다 되게 제 더츠바베게 mik바 샤도 세니 테니 조니 다랑게 틸레라소바 밥티 르라 대화제바 코나티게 테니 네캅지 대화정기 제게 요아레티 이나야 텔라 타르투고 고바자쳔보카얀 루요 마레라 perna tramsi ke mardan dela soba mela se bata tene ngarang ke tachi hoi le pap detsete tene tachi lula tomber se pati dewati ni palcher chikbanda de mato telan de jachembo yung mare so
There are two parts to this verse. The presentation of the analogy in the first 2 lines, and the presentation of what the analogy refers to in the second 2 lines. The analogy is the performance or making of burnt offerings by a Brahmin. The meaning of the analogy, what it represents, is the incorrect practice of the path of method. In the analogy, it is the custom of Brahmins who, without having any cultivation of samadhi or performing any visualization, to make burnt offerings. And out of pride in their caste, they simply assume that by burning these substances, there will be benefit. So they burn such things as butter and rice as offerings. Now, if this type of practice of burnt offerings is accompanied by samadhi and visualization, it can be useful. But if it is just done as the mere burning of the foods, with the assumption that because one is of a certain caste, it will be effective, it is not going to lead to anything. The stuff does get burnt, But aside from that, there's no other real result. Now, this refers to the practice of the path of means or path of method without the realization of emptiness. If one practices the path of method through the power of the techniques themselves, one can indeed cause the ambrosia or drops to descend from the essence of space or the hum syllable in one's head. And if one succeeds in doing this, one will, of course, experience physical bliss as a result. But if this is not conjoined with meditation on or realization of emptiness, this cannot possibly lead to its intended result, which is the realization of bliss emptiness. The drops will descend. You will feel very good for a while, but that's it. Nothing else will come of it, because one aspect of the practice is missing. So the point here is that the practice of the path of method without realization of emptiness is of no greater significance than simply throwing food into a fire and thinking that that is a grand offering.
Tene ta te la ta chirtang ke kap ndna la karisung ge yore se na tene tanda nyamtu chepar chin jil la chewa te pe kal chewa yin bala tembare re la tene ya kap ndna la kap la ta chitang ge on de se na mi chi sonam ji chu to mi yi hi ji chu ni sa ge yore la tene ta te ya mi chi sonam ji chu ji mi yi hi ji chu la tru che pa ta tene mi yi hi ji chu la te ne mi chi sonam ji chu ji tru che pa la so pa ta bo ta pe na chang chu sem pe lam ta ba ji yin na tene ti ge jin ba ta wa to chrim su wa to ze ba gam ba to zen ju cham ba la so pa paru du chim ba nga yi tene hira je paru du chim ba pe wa 히라지 파루도 쯤바 예발라 때네 파루도 쯤바 nga보 때야 파루도 쯤바 양다발라 그러월 세바 임베처나 드니베 ngaranso게 다 야르근초란 쳬바 마르녜론라 진바 나당 담비 쳬 뺄와 드니 대견들라 랑게 다제 수름 넘버 타파 수아 대견도 드니 니제다 제발라소바 감바 다 텐조 지탕가 온드세나 드니 대 단다 다 세니게 내루토바 코나 마레 텐조 미치스놈 지초지 연락래라 드니 미치스놈 지초지 연락 임베처나 미치스놈 지초 생케데야베 에 갈침보래 드니 단다 제세나 드니 트란지침보 사라하 텐조라 제 처음에 반다보지 레송한다보지 너우삼네 고아 노르시그레데 이나야 디 고아디 인지민지 만으로와데 베 갈치게라 드니 단다 드나라 템바데 가리이나 드니 쪼다 단다 세니게 내루도 버샤제침보데 드니 강가 지세니 드니 대품섬초바지 고브출 수아레라 베테견도 단다 단다 자시 히와라가 젠주가 노니야 예로 더 탐지네 투비 히랍단도 송세 드네 파루도 쯤바토 파루도 쯤바가 짐바 술템 제바 젠주 something 데 파루도 쯤바가 보테 드네 강기체도 송아레세나 히랍기체도 송아레스 히랍제베게단도 송아레스 대견돌라 단당 아란속에 다 미지선음 지수사파 대양 강기체돌라 제바레세나 서자침부 내루도 보기체돌라 제바레스 디처나 나란속에 니 서자침부 내루도 보돌라 미지선음 지수데 인지민지 거기요레라 드니 대견돌라 미지선음 지수사파 갑슬라야 미미 히지수 서자침부 내루도 바티 응어서 예바테 갈체게레라 준생 가리레세나 젠주가 나네야 파루도 침바 두부 파루도 침바 nga보텔라 히라제 파루도 침바티 여나 드니 파루도 침바 랑랑 로기 와레 마도 드니 히라제 파루도 침바티 메나 지탄게 짐바탄 와도 츠름송 와도 제바감발라 벤침부 요레데 이나야테 파루도 쯤베 통순 로기요 마레라 티처나 히라제 파루도 쯤바테 갈침부 임바 송아레라 티네 감달라 페나 진시라 소바 시에나 티네 탈랑라 소바 감나 티네 가리고기 요레세나 인지 미지 티네 사지 침부기 냠뇽 질라지 비가 또바테 고그레 소
What is being said here is that generating authentic experience and realization is very important. Now, it's important to understand what this verse is and is not saying, and in that way avoid a possible misunderstanding of it. Our path consists of the gathering of two accumulations, the conceptual or referential accumulation of merit, and the non-conceptual or non-referential accumulation of wisdom. And these two accumulations assist one another. For example, in the context of the path of a bodhisattva, the first 5 of the 6 perfections, generosity, morality, patience, diligence, and meditation, I thought I forgot one, exist in order to assist and enable the development of the 6th, which is discernment. And at the same time, because they are directed toward and joined with discernment, they become pure. They become perfections. So one should not misunderstand this verse to be saying that practices that involve reference or conceptualization are to be utterly and absolutely dismissed. We do make offerings to the 3 jewels, perform generosity for the needy, maintain moral discipline, cultivate patience, and so on. And all of these practices are important branches of the conceptual accumulation of merit. So our practice does not consist only of meditation on the mind's nature in isolation from anything else. You might misunderstand this verse to be otherwise. You might think, here, the great Brahmin Saraha has taught me that all conceptual practices are utterly useless. That would be a misunderstanding. These practices are by no means useless. They are very useful. But the point of these practices is the realization of Mahamudra. Therefore, it was written by Shantideva in his Bodhicharyavatara, these 5 branches were taught by the Buddha for the sake of discernment. The reason the Buddha taught the practices of the first 5 perfections, generosity and so forth, was that through practicing them, one can become able to realize the 6th, which is discernment. In other words, we cultivate the conceptual accumulation of merit in order to realize Mahamudra, in order to achieve the non-conceptual accumulation of wisdom. And in fact, the conscious cultivation of the conceptual accumulation of merit is necessary in order to do this. But even while it is being accumulated, this accumulation of merit must be joined with the non-conceptual accumulation of wisdom. Otherwise, as was implied in the quotation from Shantideva, in the absence of discernment, the other 5 virtues do not become paramitas or perfections because they lack discernment. So the point of this verse is, it is valuable to perform practices such as burnt offerings and the path of method, but they should always be conjoined with Mahamudra experience.
Tene ta teya timasi pagatanda hiraje parutu tsamba ta dupa la tempa do dupa ganone ya songna tene make loa mangbo je yotna tene ti make loa tenzo tene kanandro go ya pa kande langwa kande ya pa tenzo ha go yo mare la tene te tang chimbo che ga na la me lo mo bo che yo na tene tong cher ga na la za den ro thu gu ma re la ta te la kari yo re se na me yen kin che chang na tene me lo wa ja tam ba yo na ya tene te thai ne tene lam te ya bo che te ne tene ta ta da tong cher ga na la ya bo si de bo si ne le to ba yung re te pe yo na re la te yen do jalwe paru do chimba nga 다 자와 조부송지 점딘데 long depressive 바로 듣는 방아데 야 다드네 매매반다 보지래라 다 디게 레버데 드네 갑깔라 네갑진 레버라 민구바 네갑지 소놈더블란도와 라소베 고니 다 디게 타르투게 조부송지 점딘데 롱라 로투기요 마레라 다 데라 매연킨 예바 yendola 히라지 바루드 씀바 때 여나 데네 바루드 씀바 nga하데 야보 제세네 상지지 콤폰토베 람도 팅도기 와레 람양 다발라 도기 와레 숨숨네 베고네 템버런제 바레라 베데 yen도 데네 단다 깜드나라 정시침보 사라해 가 다셔제 침보때 코나 마도 예다 데지 라 데지 가관다고 쟁겨반다고 제 서로와 용그레데 있나야 데 지당게 대매 바리숭기요 말에 데 조라 인지 민지 히랍다 띵띵엔진지 냠뇽 제버진데 다 히랍세나 이히세나 땡아라서 냠린라 데니 지비게 냠뇽 제버진데 인지 민지 갈치와레 레송
In the collected sutras, which is a form of the Prajnaparamita Sutra, the following analogy is presented by the Buddha. If there were many sightless people gathered together in an empty valley, endeavoring to find their way to town, they would be unable to find their way, and they would wander around aimlessly. But if one person with sight were to accompany them and lead them to town, they could easily reach it. In the same way, the 5 perfections, other than discernment, on their own, are like sightless people. On their own, they can only lead to temporary benefit, temporary well-being, prosperity, and so on, but cannot lead to the achievement of awakening. But just as one person with sight can lead a large crowd of people without sight to their destination, as soon as discernment, the 6th perfection, is present and is joined with the other 5, they do become effective means for the achievement of awakening. So here, in the same way, what is being pointed out by the great Brahman Saraha is that these practices alone, the path of method and so forth, will not lead to awakening, but that they are not useless. They merely need to be conjoined with the practice of Mahamudra, which is to say with discernment or the wisdom of experience.
Tene ta tel te hindu tanda ngaranso ge nyomnyong la te na ya loma mangbo ta gam jam king chu nyomlin nang king mangbo gam jap ja ya hipa gam la mopa yon yepa gam la zendru ya nawa nana ya tene te si compare to mendo wanda bo je ke compare to ndo wa te si le banda bo ta ti ge te si tu sem ma tho ba sem ma sem banda bo tende yung ndo la tende ke twa yung ndo la ta te si ya jin da bo kan yang do mendo compare da bo kan yang do mendo so anda bo tende yung yo la ta ti ge nengo ta kana tu yo are se na 디게 nengo 다 지당게 다 디게 강게 돌라 선음지 초대 인지 민지 그바인 비처나 당가란서 송호 도지티바가 람타버지 옛나조 티네 라멘난 줄 감네 라마라 대바도 무위지네 솔와타바테 갈체와인 바 믹살 갈체와인 바 제타 티네 대다 대야라 티제 랑 루지고네 차코르 두종라서 바세바 Naga go ni Kanden de Jela soba Seba, Yeji go ni, Tini Sambaton Hinjela soba Gamba, Lonchi go ni, Yakanjo la Chepato Mangano la Jimba la soba Tawa, Ta Tende se ni, Tarang, Tini Sunum Jitsu de Sana, Tini Tige, Sunum Jitsu Ji, Tini Yihi Jitsu de Tangaranzo Nyamlin Laya. Dro sepa chay ta nyamlin sepa ti ke senam chi tsu sapa la dro sepa ti ta senam chi tsu ti nekap chi dreba la ma mimpa tartu kun dreba la yapo chay main roa yin bichar na tini kap ka la nana la sunga ke ti ke ta chay tanda nyam topi ke ma sing pe sachi chi gewa tenzo la hira cho yo ma re song yo re te nekap sachi chi gewa la sunga re ma to tene ngaranzo yinchi minchi tene nyamlin tan tembe go ni sonam chi tsu sa pa tela gaba ma re la gaba ma yin pa tsang yo ma si kasi ina ya kal che wa ji.
Many of us have actually experienced this in our own practice. Many students have reported that they're very interested in the practice of meditation. They are devoted to it. They're diligent. They're really trying. But they become dissatisfied with their practice because they perceive a lack of progress. They come to me and they say, there is no improvement. The reason may be that meditation needs to be supplemented by the accumulation of merit. For example, in the context of Vajrayana practice, we always practice Saguru Yoga and the performance of devoted supplication as the basis for our meditation practice. And also, with one's body, one can perform prostrations and circumambulation. With one's speech, liturgical practice and mantra repetition. With one's mind, meditation on compassion, and with one's wealth, engaging in acts of generosity. All of this will help your meditation practice progress. And because these virtuous deeds are combined with the practice of meditation, they will not just lead to some kind of temporary benefit, as would normal acts of defiled virtue. So understand that in this verse, Saraha is not refuting the validity or usefulness of the path of means or the accumulation of merit. In fact, he is by implication demonstrating its validity by showing that its validity is in that it leads to, and thereby must be combined with, the realization of Mahamudra.
Tene ta te jesu la six jepa nishu tsai ba ge wang du xie na ta tanda tene ta te yang je tu mu ge nyam ni zo xie ba da je la tene ta te la tu mu ge we tang tu mu ge zhe la tene je jiu ge te le xiu tene te yang je rang ge jie ge den du shong ne tene je de la dewa jia chen bu jie ba xie ba ten qing wer xie ba tene je song yo re la tene de ta tan da ji dang ge di kap je zhang xie dang qi ru bu qu lu jie ge nyam lin da bu jie la song yin ba da la tene de ta bu yong xin de zhou xie de tene ta ti ge zupo la te je dewan da bu ji kap kap la ta ti ge nyam lin da bu ji xie ba la tene ta ti ge ngarang la nyam nyong te sa ji ji ba la tene nga jal ji ong ge nga nan jur ba yin hi serwa zong gi re ma to tene ngune ge ti ge tan tang be nyam lin sen ni ge ne lu to pe ge Yeshe dang sha ja chen bu ge nyam nyong de me na tene ngune ge nan jur ba la ro go ma re so
In the 24th verse, Saraha describes the incorrect practice of chandali or tumo. And essentially, he is describing an approach to it that is more characteristic of non-Buddhist traditions. But in essence, the criticism he is making is that the physical techniques of chandali will cause, through the blazing of the fire from the abdomen, cause the drops to descend from the top of one's head. They will land on one's tongue, and then one experiences a state of great pleasure. But if this is not motivated by the wish to realize Mahamudra and is not combined with the experience of Mahamudra, then the experience of the pleasure of chandali alone will merely lead to a further attachment. One has created something more to which one becomes attached. And therefore, as it says in the verse, the result is the practitioner becomes thoroughly disturbed, even more disturbed or obsessed by the attachment they have developed to the experience of the practice. Not only do they become disturbed or obsessed, but they become swayed by pride because their experience is something very special to them. And therefore, thinking that they have experienced something tremendous, they call themselves yogis. But since they have no recognition or even experience of their mind's nature, they are unfit to be called yogis and have nothing to be proud of.
Tene ta te jesu la ta tanda tsis jepa nishu zanga pa te ta rangri ke korzo re la tene te la ya jerdo rangri sinki ti tsite jitan da bo je la kanga thong rangi rangri pa da bo je la tene te ya tenju ge on de xie na tene tanda kepa mangbu ge semege tenju ta tene omen tenju kahe ge na la rangri de be yore tene sem hipate rangi rangla ko to majur pa rangi rang hakko yore sonde duba je ta tene ya omal ge tenju kahe ge na la tene rangri senke de tsani yo se ge ma re tene rangi perna metzal chimboche ge rangi nyawala henzani tugu mare la pe te yendo ta pe niba ga ondo sena raldren namboche kase che nona ya pa yendo kanga che tugu yo re de rangi rangi rang la tsani che tuya yo mare la pe te yendo la sen rangi rang re senke de tsani yung sig mare suwa nang yin de yang sang yo re la tene tanda ngaran soge tene ta tanda chaja chimbu ga kabulsu sem rangi rang nelu to ne nyamsu nyong yung sung yo re ta tenzo la che tena che kapka la rangri ga ya banda bo kapka la rangri de kunzo zong de yin banda bo kapka la rangri de pe tandam kal chembo che tawa thobo che yin banda bo ta tende te nyamnyo da bo yo re la tene te ya te ngune siena tene ngalwanda bojin thong yo are de ngune siena ngal ge yo mare tene tanda cheme ge na ne ta chen number hi ba chu je de tene rari ge na ba ta demba sungi yo are la tene tuba hi je number hi ba yin na yo rari tang demba go nga yin number hi ba yin na yo rari tang demba rari nga sam sung kin da bo ta tene song yo are la te yendo la kin yin number hiba yin ya rangri ta demba ta hiba yin rang ko to majur pa sen ti rangri de kandin de ge yore sen rang la ko to majur pa se ngarang ge sen la kandi char sung ngarang ge sen na nam to kandi ji char sung per na meg number hiba ta be yin na meg number hibe ngarang zuk ti khande jin thong song na we number ki be ngarang dra de khande thu song ha ko an bo je ta yin ji ki ba yin na tini ti cherang me ki zuk ti thong song is trig ban bo je re de ngarang gi ngu se trma gu ba thong na yong thong a hi man thong na yong man thong a hi ge yo re la ti ngu ni song lo ta chi bo che gu yo ma rang yin ki san rang ge rang ri ba yin be cher na tini ti rang ri ti ye song yo rāngrik te ye song yuwa re te ina ye ti rāngrik te khande re se na rāngrik te kyuman rabu kunzon rabu tamalpa rabu rāngrik jire ma to te la nga rāngso shaja chimbe ka noni ten ka peke dandam rāngrik ki hi sengen rabu tende kaya ma re te rāngrik te ta uma ne uma tanda uma njukwa tang tene te kenda la tanda jasi kiwa la ga shongshu sempe chepa lan jupe ke nang ne rāngrik senkin te tsani yo ma re song gākpa japa te khande jire se na tige tsema ne tempe rāngrik te gāpa ma re la chaja chenpo ne tempe rāngrik te gāpa ma re chitang sem rangi rang la ta senkin da bota sem te nguma che yimbe cherna te ta ta ja ta ji ni ge go ni ta pen na ral rangi rang che pa na yin ge che tang khin che ta si gi yol da bo che se ne ta ya yo re se na ta ya yo ma re so ne ga pa ja pa re 단다 처자 침부 값을라 야 간디 랑리기 히시도 간디 지땡기 요르세나 테라 센 랑게 랑라 따자동 따지 니제 고니 데니 응우보 도돈다보제 라타 응우보 도돈다보제 기테니 따지 센테요 응우보 트바제다 따지기 열테 응우보 트바제라 따기요 따니 테 응우슨 통야지 요르베스니 요마레라 다오나 랑리기 예시 생긴데 소소롱리 예시 제요와 두섬 잘위용라 찬살로 생긴데 간디지레세나 데네 랑리비 예시 세드 랑게 네루데 예네 랑힌지 마드빠지 옌바 티 랑힌지 마드빠테야 단다 나란소 소수지오 타말베게 또베게 돈이라보다 sambe게 돈이 또 매바 매종 매가가 넘버다보지 마인 파르 데네 살동 성든주 파세나యాం다 데동 성든주 파세나యాం다 인다 이히 성든주 파세나얀다 티 네루 테 랑게 따자타 따지 니그고네 따기요 마레테 이나야 랑기 셈지 ngote nyamsu nyong yin becherna te nyamsu nyong tu yo arela te la rang ribi hi so
Verse 25 addresses the topic of self-awareness. And the term self-awareness shows up in several different contexts within Buddhism. In the study of valid cognition, and in some middle way school contexts, it's said that self-awareness exists, which means that one can know what one is experiencing. Then in other contexts, such as many presentations of the middle way, it's said that self-awareness is impossible. Self-awareness would be like a sword being able to cut itself, or like a strong man being able to lift himself. But then again, in Mahamudra and similar teachings, the term self-awareness turns up again. So we seem to have three contexts for this term. The one, that of valid cognition, where essentially it seems to be a relative truth. And then the second, where it appears to be refuted as an absolute truth. And then the third, that of Mahamudra, where it again turns up and is not only not refuted, but is asserted to be the highest pinnacle of the view. While this may, on first glance, seem to be a contradiction, in fact, it is not. The self-awareness spoken of in valid cognition is simply the capacity that any cognition has to experience itself in the most basic sense. According to valid cognition, each of the 8 consciousnesses, such as the 5 sense consciousnesses, the mental consciousness, and the all-basis consciousness, and so forth, all have this quality or ability of self-awareness, which simply consists of the fact that a consciousness is not concealed from itself. This means, for example, that you know, without having to ask anyone else or without having to deduce it or infer it, what has arisen in your mind, because you experience it. And that is what self-awareness means in the basic context of valid cognition. You know what you see with your eye consciousness. Now, you don't know what arises in the mind of others or what others see. You have to ask them. But you know what you see. You know what is in your mind. You neither need to ask nor infer it. This self-awareness is mundane. It is limited to the field of relative truth. It is not the self-awareness or self-aware wisdom that is spoken of in Mahamudra. Secondly, in the context of the Middle Way presentations, for example, in Chandrakirti's Guide to the Middle Way and Shantideva's Bodhicharyavatara, there are refutations of self-awareness. But the self-awareness that is being refuted here, that is said to be impossible, is neither the self-awareness described in the valid cognition texts, nor the self-aware wisdom that is discussed in the Mahamudra teachings. What is refuted in the Middle Way context is self-awareness in the sense of the mind being able to see itself as an object other than itself. And that is why it is refuted using analogies like the impossibility of a sword cutting itself. Now, this is very different from the self-aware wisdom of Mahamudra. The self-awareness that is refuted is one that would have a separate subject and object. The self-aware wisdom of Mahamudra is precisely that wisdom or awareness that is free of subject and object. The self-aware wisdom of Mahamudra is not the mind seeing itself as an object of perception, like a solid or substantial thing. When it's said, homage to the great mother Prajnaparamita, who is the field or the experience of self-aware wisdom, it means that self-aware wisdom is when the mind sees its own primordial freedom from existence. The mind sees its own nature, which is from the very beginning the absence of substantial existence. But because this freedom from existence is not nothingness, is not mere non-existence, because it is at the same time cognitive lucidity and therefore inherent wisdom, it can cognize, and therefore it cognizes itself. In that this nature cognizes or knows itself, it is without a viewer and viewed. And that is the self-awareness spoken of in Mahamudra.
Tene ta tela ya kapnde yon de sena rarik te ta rarik yihi je rarik yihi sena ya rarik nyomnyon ra bo ji ne te yin la teng yo re te yin la teng yo re so ne ta ti rang ri te kan de se na ta tan da jitang ge umani ga pa ja ga rong ri gi nyam nyong da bo ji ji pa yin na yan ra te yin da chema ne tem be ta ni kun zo ge rong ri gi nyam nyong da bo ji ji pa yin na yan ra te ta bu ta che rong ko to ma jur pa sam che nyam nyong da bo ji ji ni ta te ngarang ge sam na ya bo ji yin sam ni yin la ten yin la ten ne kang ki jimba te ni trol hi ser ta ti ge rari ti ge tene konsong korwa le trol tu yo mare te ta bu rong ri te che tang korwa la jingsi da ta chi tang korwe gen tun hon ra bo che re ma to ti rari te chi tang ge rari re na rari re te yin na ti rari te yang ta pe ge so so yong ta pe ge so so rari ge hi te re yo are se na yo re yo mare la 다 디게 쩌도 원아 사자 침비게 냠링게 라릭 데라 칸데지 요아르세나 디게 랑힌게 셈게 냠뇽 점 많이 봐 다 디게 ngoranhin ki tomba imba te la ngansong ke nyamnyo chi ba che da ngoranhin ki tomba te namkha tomba da bu ke nyamnyo ma imba tene khoran la thomo ma imbe salton song dun ju bi chechu ya pa te nyans nyo la tene so so ran ri bi hi se ge wa la te ti ge tol ge yo are se na tol ge yo are te yin ya tanda ne kap ge ran ri ten ju ge tol ge yo ma re la tene te ta bu ge rang ge ti tol wa yin samni rangi nyamsu nyo yin la ya te trol ge resen te na te yang ta palan do ma re te yang ta palan mendo wa te khande je resen na per na te ne ta ti pe te norbu chimbla pe ga yo re la ta norbu margi te khadu dang yo re 카도 장고 임바텔라 데니 다티 응니게 노르 마기 라 마기 임발라 히나 야포레데 예나요 노르 마기 데 카도 장고 임발라 히네 데니 제 마기 주마 마기 라 마임바 칭부 데니 카도 장고 야바텔라 노르 마기 레세네 노르부겐 세니 미히베 몬바텐주게 rumboche 탑 미히바 tene rinpoche ta margi ki yentin teya mahi chimbu ki jan teya mahi ne norbu in chimbu la norbu margi resi ne chulndro tabu tene rangri kyuma teya la rangri soso yung tabu ripi yeshe teya chul na ta tige non chulndro yungi yore.
In verse 25, the situation that is described is where someone has an experience of some kind of self-awareness and thinks that it is therefore self-aware wisdom, that it is the recognition of the mind's nature, and talks of their experience to others. Now, this could be an experience of the ordinary self-awareness of relative truth, which is described in valid cognition, or it could be the misapprehension of the existence of the self-awareness which is refuted in the Middle Way School. In either case, it is not the true experience of self-aware wisdom. But thinking that being aware of your mind, experiencing your mind, is the experience of the mind's nature, making that mistake causes you to assume that this alone will liberate you. So therefore, in speaking of your experience to others, you say things like, whatever binds will liberate itself, or that itself will liberate. Now, the distinction that in this situation the practitioner is failing to make is that the self-aware wisdom described in Mahamudra is not merely the experience of the mind. It is the recognition of the mind's nature. The mere experience of the mind is the self-awareness described in valid cognition. But the recognition of the mind's nature is seeing the mind's emptiness, experiencing it, and at the same time experiencing the mind's cognitive lucidity, which cannot be separated from that emptiness. So self-aware wisdom is the wisdom of the direct experience of emptiness lucidity. That will liberate you, but merely being aware of your mind will not. So here, the analogy for the mistaking of mere self-awareness for self-aware wisdom is the mistaking of a green trinket for an emerald. What they have in common is the color, green. Just as what self-awareness and self-aware wisdom have in common is self-awareness. But aside from that, there is a great difference between a trinket and an emerald. And the mistaking of the one for the other simply means that you do not know what the characteristics of an emerald are, or you would not make that mistake. So in the same way, when you mistake self-awareness for self-aware wisdom, it means that you don't know what the characteristics of self-aware wisdom are.
Tene ta te ye Yeshe la tsiksu je ba ni za du ba de la yang ta de jitang ge sha je chim bu nyam ling ge ka sa la nyam do sharwa tene ta de la yang cha yin pang gu ba da bo ta de Yeshe la dang me ni ba da bo tem ba la tene ta te yang je ra gen la ser don tul ba 다데 공도 템베기 빼당 파시 집안 라보제 카도 장고 임발라 테네 마르기 임바라 som바타 다감드나라 라게데 카도 서보 임발라 테네 서지 로지니 다디 서yin 냠나 다디게 트로바치 보주고 요레라 서라 서든잖아 다디라 테네 옌티지 투 요레 라게나 서든 조나 테네 랑고 코고 요레라 테네 테피 테네 다 단당 아랑수 띵엔zen gombe capsula 야 다치당게 히네지 띵엔zen gombe cap이 나양다 혼통게 띵엔zen gombe cap이 나양다 티 티니제 데라 냠뇽제기 요래라 티니 냠뇽테 티니 냠뇽데 두포 리베시는 냠뇽데 두포 마레 띵엔zen gombal라 티니 제게 요래라 다티 띵엔zen gombal라 티니 제게 요래 얘나야 테 냠뇽라 히니 냠뇽데 베 제버터 파파이게 옌 썸나 테네 디게 트로바지게 요래라 테니 테야 pernacaji ngorg lama thamchi ngorg non to sona nyom naving dondati yal nendro sore ni nyom senkete chitang gomya gomate ni chegi yore te yinaya tni tela te dal tumbatam hupanda bochi sene yal dogre te khadu la tembo yo mare so je da tene ta te yendola te yendo masi ba yang gorg non to sona nyom zangbo desal matu jon zamba sona tawa mai sona nyom zangbo ta nyom yapo re vesine nyom yapo re yapo chunga la gom yapo chi pa la tene dewi ge nyom kapka la dewi ge nyom che ge yore kapka la salwe ge nyom che ge yore kapka la tene matu pe nyom che ge yore la te ta bu desal matu pe nyom che na ya tige gom gen devo te desal matu pe nyom te chewe ge che re vesine mare 다 검데 냠뇽 검게 드레버데 칸디지레세나 응니게 네루 용탁바게 똑바질 지에게 쳇도 임베처나 데네 다 티처나 깝깔라 냠뇽라 신 냠뇽라 출 덴데 용기 요라라 냠뇽 쳇네 단담 드버시 다티 단담 예 삼바다보지 정나 다티 팽기요 말이스
Next comes verse 26, which is concerned with the issue of attachment to minor experiences. The analogy presented here is the analogy of mistaking brass for gold, which is pretty well identical in style or function to the previous analogy of mistaking a trinket for an emerald because of the color. One might mistake brass for gold because they have the same or similar color. Now, just as if you recognize gold as gold, it is helpful, if you mistake brass as gold, you merely become confused. In the same way, when you're practicing meditation, if you mistake a temporary or minor experience for a state of attainment, you become deceived, like someone mistaking brass for gold. Because just as brass does not have the value of gold, minor or temporary experiences do not have the value of true realization. It is normal and healthy for experiences to arise. Whether one is practicing tranquility or insight, various minor experiences will arise from time to time. But they have no great value in and of themselves. And therefore it is said, temporary experiences are like mist. They will vanish. Elsewhere it is said, if you become attached to positive experiences, such as bliss, lucidity, and non-conceptuality, you lack the view. Experiences can sometimes be very positive, like experiences of intense bliss or well-being, lucidity, and of non-conceptuality. But if you are caught by these experiences and you come to mistake the path by thinking that having gained this experience, the path consists of trying to maintain it or carry it on, then you have lost the view. Because these experiences are not the point of meditation. The point of meditation is recognition of the nature of your mind. And therefore, as it says in the second line of this verse, holding on to experiences will not help you, because you cannot accomplish the ultimate aim of meditation through attempting to maintain or carry experience with you.
Tene ta te tabu ge nyamla khemba te ya mulam je dewala jis chapanda bo tangaran so mulam la ya mulam yin ya mulam la dewa ji na dewa ta deji dang temba tong longje dang temba da thonsam soba ji jong na ta te khora dewa re la deji ne deji re te yin ya te la chahin khemba se na be phemba yo ma re phemba me be jonsin te ta nyimu ge deji la longje na te phemba yepa da wo je 다 되는 세무게 물람게 되지라 롱제나 차힌히나 텔펜바 메바 테 요레라 테 예비 존신데 칸데레세나 되는 물람제 데와텔라 힘보히로 요마레 딱바히로 요마레 템보 요마레 테 존신 텔라 테네 물람제 데와라 지스 차바테 테지 춘동도 보지레 지당 코랑고 데와타 보지레 티나에 텔라 차힌히바텔 펜토 요마레 Tene teacher na tanda pete kanti yaparese na ngaranso ta gom ge kapla nyam che ge yorela nyam che wa tela macha pa che to mayin pa te pe kal che ware te la tene ta tanda kal che wa imbe mase pa ge tanda chitang ge nyamlin che pe kasala mangbola ta nyam da bo che ge yorela tene ti nyam tela chahin ya hyor ge yore ta kap che la ngala nyam ya pu chi chi song te ta te ayong te ni ma che la nyam ya pu chi chi te la pe Khenchen da bo chi hyo te yang jar to yong ju ge rewa da bo chi che ne gam ja tene te yang jar to yong ma to pa che tene te ge te chi semba te magawa to semba te ma chi pa to tene che rewa te ndu ma song sam ba da bo tene ge chorwa yong ge yore la te ta bo mayin par nyam sang bo chi chi na ya po re te khora nyam chi pa re la nyam ya po te ma chi na ye che par yo ma re ngarang ge ka nyam nyong ya pa te gam ni nyam su nyong na to pe hi te jela che wa re la teacher na ngarang so ge nyam chi na ya chi yen da la gam ni nyam salem ba te pe kal che wa re la nyam ma chi na ya ma chi ni gam ni nyam salem ba te kal che wa re ma to nyam te la te chi he na te ni te chi chi wa chiwandabu yungu yore. Teacher na ta kanga ngaranzo gom jamking lomatso la nyam topa mandawa chorowa mandawa ndabuta samno mandawa ndabuta tene minom do no mandawa hawala so batinde ndamanda nyam la mandawa yungu yore la tene te nyam tende chi sona tene te la kan kal chegere sena nyam te yapore sombe ge henchota dubore sombe ge jikto kaya mepa koranta ti semji no aji imbicherna te la tene hencho don jito machi par teka la tene kora tingen zen jundu gambate ta jenchoni gambate kalche yore la teacher na kamdar mulam je dewa la jis chopper sini pumbo mata dewa ta chi sera ta pumbo te tige dewa zongke de dewa chimala yore senkin da hege yore de tela pemba hido yo mare nyamna hemba nyenge mare so.
Also, in this verse is a second analogy for attachment to meditation experience, which is attachment to the pleasure or happiness experienced in a dream. Being attached to a specific or temporary experience in meditation is like being attached to something pleasant that you experienced in a dream. Now, when you are happy or experience pleasure in a dream, of course you are happy, you are experiencing pleasure. But it is not going to last because the dream state is so unstable. So, in fact, we would have to say that the pleasure experienced in a dream has even less value because it has even less stability than the pleasure experienced in the waking state. The state of dreaming is a state of extra bewilderment. And so what is experienced in the dream is very temporary and very unstable. It is therefore of no use to try to hold on to something that happened in a dream or appeared in a dream. In the same way, when you practice meditation, various experiences will arise. But it is important not to fixate on them or become attached to them. For example, a positive experience will occur in your meditation. Afterwards, you will reflect upon it and think, I had a good experience. By thinking of it as a good experience, you've generated the wish that it will reoccur. So then the next day you practice, it doesn't reoccur, automatically you're disappointed. There's nothing wrong with the experience. Experience is good. It's just an indication that you're practicing. But there's no necessity to try to prolong it or to hope that it will reoccur. Because aside from merely indicating that you are practicing, it has no value in and of itself. So when an experience arises, simply continue to practice meditation as you were before. And if an experience stops arising, or if experiences don't arise, simply continue to practice meditation as you were before. If you become attached to any type of meditation experience, that is a fetter. This includes experiences, visions, dreams, whatever. Don't regard these things as having any particular positive or negative value. Don't think of them as good or bad. They are just appearances within your mind. Therefore, they are not worth craving, nor is it necessary to fear them. Also, expecting such a meditation experience to last, and therefore setting yourself up for disappointment, is like, as it says in the fourth line, knowing that the skandhas are impermanent, but expecting the bliss experienced by impermanent skandhas to outlast them, to be permanent. Because the meditative state that produces the particular experience is impermanent, the experience is impermanent. In the same way, you cannot expect a state of bliss that is grounded in a certain set of aggregates to outlast those aggregates themselves.
Tene ta tige tanda tsexjeba ye yutuparela tene tene ta zam jena desi twanang de inkin de twana.
So those are our 4 verses for this afternoon, and we're therefore going to stop. But if you have any questions you'd like to ask, please go ahead.
Okay. Rinpoche, yesterday you stated that the path of methods and the path of liberation, if practiced together, are the most effective means of practicing. And I'm wondering what you meant by the path of methods in that context and why the combination is the most effective.
That's not my translation of your question. That's just coughing. Well, it's better than what I said a couple of days ago. Dire, kasong song song. That the tablam dang jolam the lenjeso zongjuk to nyamselana the lam chepa the papa da ware song song. Dege wanda zena tablam kanla segi ware.
다 지탄가 온트시나 단다 problem 사제 침버세도 탈랑 맨나야 되게 와라라 되는 나랑게 휴지가 탈랑데 간데 거기 와라세나 가서 강도 휴바 현도 단다 당가란서 다 단다 텔로타 나로네 말라지데 까지 고마르생게 냠린 낭주가 다 탈랑동 돌람니 보데 강랑 의승기 와르세나 돌람 차제 쳔보다 탈람데 나로추투 숨기 와라라 데 나로추투 대야 다 자와 단다 데네 다 나로추투 다 데네 제렘 이람지 제렘 된소라 탈람 그 나반다고 숨기 와래라 데 티처나 나랑 탈람데 텔랑 숨기 와래.
Well, in general, it is fine to practice the path of liberation, Mahamudra, without the path of method. But what I was referring to when I said that was the path of method as it is understood in the Kagyu tradition, coming down from Talopa and Naropa down to the present day, in which context the path of liberation is defined as Mahamudra and the path of method as the 6 dharmas of Naropa. However, in that context, the 6 dharmas of Naropa is the principal path of method, but it would also include the yidam practices which must precede it.
대야 단다 제르도 마르파 로자 다 자가르도 페네 다 콩게 자가르도 린섬도 페 콩게 찐창부게 주게 나네 지사모 지파도지 휴세 되는 지파도지다 용인 콜로 된주 휴 성요라라 다 디게 나네자 삽슈라고 된 콜로 된주 임베처나 나라서 다까지 고마르 생긴 콜로 된주 냠네 난게 와래 콜로 된주 냠네 나와 텔라야 되네 넘버 2 와래라 탑 얍지 넘버 2 템번 콜로 된주 동 혈압 염지 넘버 2 템바데 도지 포문이 와래라 되네 다 디나네 장 조치휴라보데 나라서까지 고마른 생각했더니 혈압 염지 넘버 2 템바 도지 포문이 냠네 난게 와래라 되네 디게 도지 포문이 냠네 제름가 온듯이나 도지 포문이 냠네 당 되네 조름가 온듯이나 당 콜로 된주도 도지 포문 성게 조름게 나로추투 텔라 탑람 세기 와래라 되네 텔라 돌람 세나 되네 히네도 랑통이 고니 조 생진내루데 코나 라 잘도 되는 건바 텔라 돌람 찾으심 보세요 와래.
Marpa, the translator, went to India 3 times. And when speaking of the Dharma that he brought back to Tibet, he said, I received Hevajra, the profound Tantra, and Chakrasamvara, the quintessence. By his referring to Chakrasamvara as the quintessence, it is evident that he considered Chakrasamvara the most profound of cycles of practice. And therefore, since the time of Marpa, we have taken that cycle as the basis for our practice of the path of method. In fact, it has 2 aspects. When method itself is emphasized, this deity is practiced as the father, Chakrasamvara, and when discernment is emphasized, it is practiced as the mother, Vajravarahi or Vajrayogini. Of these 2, historically, we have tended to principally emphasize as a lineage Vajravarahi. Now, the practice of Vajravarahi itself has 2 aspects. The generation stage is the Vajravarahi or Vajrayogini sadhana, and the completion stage is the practice of the 6 dharmas of Naropa. Although you can also understand that as the completion stage of both the Vajravarahi and Chakrasamvara aspects. So that is the path of method, and in the Kagyu context, the corresponding path of liberation is the practices of tranquility and insight in the context of Mahamudra.
Rinpoche, a question came up in our study group, and it was told that once you reach the first bhumi, that there's no falling back, and that you reach the first bhumi when you've had experience of Mahamudra, and that from that point there's like no degeneration. And what I was wondering, my experience has been like that the path is very gradual, and sometimes you click in and sometimes you click out, and sometimes you click out for a long time and then back in again. And it seemed, then I started, I started to doubt, well, did I realize anything? And then other people made it worse by saying, well, you would know if you so I feel like it's a, my feeling is that it's a gradual thing, and I just wondered about this no in and out business, okay. If that really has anything to do with the first bhumi, or what it does have to do with it. And also I thought we were supposed to keep continuing to try to prolong it, and then I got a little confused with, well, maybe you're just prolonging your experience or something. So okay. Those were kind of the 2 prongs of that question. Okay. I hope it was understandable.
The Driva de la Chinese, the Konsoge discussion group, nana the Degosons, that the Sadampo Raptugawa Topsana, Lamle Chimidopare Gosons. Deneyang Degoson, Sadampo Raptugawa de Semji Nelok, Chajimp Nelok, Dombo Nyomso Nyomwe Kapla Serviores. Then a day in then Semji Nelokam, Chajimp Nelok de Nyanyon Dombo, Yomwe Kapso, Chimidopa Yongodus. Morongi Nyamyola did all mares. Some sengi nelok tets tongidu, then it tongamendo. Then it tets chuksam, weltsam, tongnang, that's on it, tongamendo. Then it dambo de Sadampo Raptugawa de Chimidopa ki Sadampo Reves, de Joa Chick. Usena Sem Dampo Tongwe de Semgon Dampo Tongwe Capsu de Sadampo Topa Reves. Driva Chick Yenare, Yenare. Chidon so de Sadampo de Chimidopa Sayempale ki Yachik Dang, then Semgo Tongwat Samji Sadampo Togi Reves de Joa Chick Dang. chigde that the Sadombo totna, the Tonlam totna, then the Chirmedo parepes, the Doache. Nusana, Sengo Truxam Toma de Tonlam repes.
Yeah. 다텔라 테네 기타그 당가란서 송호 도르제티피가 람네 페파제다 테네 다 자치와 장추sembe 람네 페파 넘버 니와라 테네 대양 페르나 산지엔라보제 예나 테네 다자 그때바 조부송지 점된데 테네 칼바 토미 somma sonom지 소사니 테네 넘버 조퍼 산지바레 테네 대견도 송호 도지 티피가 람니나 예시 말라 레파타베지 예나 콘 코세 제게 테네 손주 도진 총고 공포 톱네 산지바레 다 티니라 테네 운니게 톡게 톡이 희경오라 테네 테라 체프리오르비스네 체프리오 마레 조부송지 점된데 하자트비가 가 직바테 제시말라리비게 직바레 제시 조부송지 점된데지 가 빠와테 제시말라리비게 빠와레 라 다티게 람텔라 체프리오르 체프리 예발라 테네 다 체프르데 간데 용게 요르세나 단다 조부송지 점된데 칼바몬볼로 소놈지 추사바 임베체나 꿀룰란 센좀보 순치타니도 페지좀보 제주기 엔텐도 담바 송라 테네 소용이야 투주동 담바 테네 트네 섬지 마차바타 텐데기 엔텐 포송초바 용게 요레 라 테네 제지 말라 레파텔라 산지게 톱게 예히데 요레데 옛나요 콩 꿀루데 지왕 하말라 소페 소놈니 나엔다 레이나엔다 다 텔라텐 콩지바 임베체나 콩라 콜란 신좀보 순치타니도 페지좀보 제주 요마레 성라 소용이야 투주 요마레 틀레 섬지 마차바 조부송지 점된데 캬차토바 나기 요마레라 디게 체퍼데 가나테니 중화레시나 띵엔젠지 누발라 테니 콩가 콩남바니게 토 예히정오 텔라 체퍼요 마레테 이나야 소놈지 추사 마사가 람 링보당 람 템보 예메 라테니 탈람디 뇽람 예메 라테니 테니테지 텔라 체퍼 용기요레 데점게 체퍼 용기요레 대연들라 단당 아란소 센지 내루 도바테야 춘이게 내루 도바레시나 도바레 데라 테네 통랑게 이히 질라니 비캅슬라 치르모도 바레베시나 치르모도 바레 레테 이나야 단다 나란소 로버도 세니게 내루 탑지 젠탑스 모테이가 바레 사통바라드가 정주 semba이나 데 칼바몬볼로 소놈지 추사니 람르바긴들 데바임베체나 치르모도 바레 때 이나야 나란스 타지 센터스 모테이가 바임베체나 치르모도 바마레 라 또리기 체퍼게 튜니기 넬루 또리기 온드세나 데시 찌바 나기 용기 요레데 옌팅기 체벌라 데시 체퍼 요레
Inside it. Where are you? Where are you? I get antsy if I can't see the person. There is a difference between proceeding through the path to awakening by means of the profound path of Vajrayana or secret mantra and the vast path of a bodhisattva. For example, if we compare two individuals, both of whom achieved perfect awakening, the Buddha and Jetsun Milarepa, the Buddha, our teacher, the Samyak Sambuddha, having gathered the accumulations for 3 innumerable aeons, achieved Buddhahood. Jetsun Milarepa achieved the state of great unity, the state of Vajradhara, in one lifetime and one body. What they achieved in terms of their minds, their wisdom, what they realized is no different from one another. Whatever the Buddha saw, Milarepa saw. Whatever the Buddha abandoned, Milarepa abandoned. But because their paths were different, the way that result or fruition manifested was different. Because the Buddha achieved Buddhahood through these 3 innumerable aeons, upon achieving awakening, his body was adorned with the marks and signs, the 32 marks and 80 signs of physical perfection, his speech with the 60 limbs of melody, and his activity was both excellent and pervasive. Now, Milarepa realized the same thing that the Buddha realized, but you could say because of the difference in merit accumulated or because of the difference of path, it doesn't matter how you put it, Milarepa's body was not adorned with the 32 marks and 80 signs. He did not possess the 60 limbs of melody, nor has his activity been identical to that of Buddha Shakyamuni. The wisdom is the same, but the difference in the manifestation of the result is the difference between the manner of gathering the accumulations, or you could say the length and stability of the paths. So, to get to your question, when you see the nature of your mind, you are seeing dharmata. A first-level bodhisattva realizes dharmata. A first-level bodhisattva achieves a state beyond reversal. Those 3 things are all true, but they're all separate statements. Now put them together. Although we realize the same nature that is realized by a first-level bodhisattva on the path, on the vast path of the Mahayana, because the circumstances, means, or condition for our realizing it is different. Because we achieve this insight through what is called abrupt introduction, we do not achieve a state of irreversibility simply through realizing dharmata. So the nature that is seen by a Mahamudra practitioner is the same as the nature seen by a first-level bodhisattva on the path of the Mahayana, but the qualities that come with those insights are different. That's it. Pendande